Hey everybody, Steve O'Neill here. I'm with Mike Vinson, who is our site coordinator at Hempfield United Methodist, and he's going to be taking us through a short training today on dealing with some of the more infrequent, what we're calling special cases that we see sometimes in VITA. Power of attorneys, dealing with taxpayers who are deceased. So how to go about handling these things, and we'll be showing you how to do this in TaxSlayer. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it to Mike and he'll get us going.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Yeah, Steve said we're going to talk two situations. When you have a client comes in and they're telling you that they are power of attorney for the taxpayer who is not present, or they come in and say they are an executor and they're trying to get the final return filed for a deceased taxpayer. So let's talk about the power of attorney first. Now, the need to remember is that power of attorney is only used if the taxpayer is still living. If the taxpayer has passed away, we can no longer use power of attorney. Then we have to wait for an executor to be announced and then do a final return for the taxpayer. So power of attorney, the taxpayer must still be living. And I'm going to really go to TaxSlayer fairly quickly. It's not that difficult, but the work is in TaxSlayer. So the representative comes in, they tell you their power of attorney. You're getting ready to do the tax return now for a taxpayer who isn't present. So you put all your input into TaxSlayer and you want to do the power of attorney. So let's jump over to TaxSlayer, and I've opened a return that we're going to add a power of attorney to. So power of attorney is found in the federal section down under miscellaneous forms. So we're going to click on that. We're going to scroll down, and power of attorney and declaration of the representative form. So we're going to begin that. The first thing they ask you for is a plan number. You leave that blank. Unless it's a lawyer who is the power of attorney, there is not a plan number. We hit continue. They ask for the name of the power of attorney. So that's the client who's sitting in front of you. So we'll just make up a name for now. You're required to put the address in for the power of attorney. So we'll make up an address. I guess you have to have a zip code that's for real. Okay, so we have an address in, the CAF number, the PTIN number, we don't need. You actually don't have to have a phone number, but I would put one in for the person who is acting as the power of attorney. Okay, we continue to scroll down, and it says check if they are to be sent copies of notices and communication. I would check that one. And then you have to declare who the power of attorney is. And in just about every case we have, it's going to be a family member. We see a lot of sons and daughters who are power of attorney for a parent who can't come in anymore. So it's going to be a family member. Or it could be a parent who has a handicapped child who they're doing a tax return for. No licensing jurisdiction, no bar license. We're finished with this page, so we're going to hit continue. And it didn't like the zip code I put in, so we'll correct that and we'll continue again. Okay, we hit continue. And they ask for what matter are we asking for a power of attorney on? So we're asking for a power of attorney on a tax return. What tax form number are we talking about? 1040. You cannot put all in this category. You have to designate what tax forms this power of attorney is covering. So 1040 will suffice. Again, they ask you how many years is this power of attorney good for, and you cannot use the word all. You have to select the years that you want to use. So power of attorneys are normally good for 4 years. So I would put in 2018-2022. The federal government says that they keep these power of attorneys in their record center in Texas for 4 years. That's why we use 4 years. Okay, any additional acts that the power of attorney is good for, and of course we're going to check signing a return. And that is normally it for filling out the power of attorney. When we hit continue, it'll take us back out of the power of attorney and back to the tax return. So now we're going to go down and see what that did for us in the printout. Okay, we're over at the summary print. We're going to get to the PDF of the tax return. As long as text layer is working here. And we're going to scroll down through until we find the power of attorney, which is down under everything else. Okay, Form 2848 is the power of attorney. And you'll notice that it's 2 pages long. I want to really point out on the second page under Part 2, right here, you need to get the power of attorney, the client, the person that you're working with to sign it right here. The taxpayer, the person who isn't at the tax return, does not have to sign it, but the client or the power of attorney does need to sign the power of attorney right here. Okay, and then that's a 2-page form. There's another form I think I've scrolled by. Let me see if I can find it. It's a form, I believe it's 8853. Okay, 8453, 8453. This tells you that you're mailing in a power of attorney. So when you print the return out, you're going to take the 8453, the 2848 with the client's signature on it, and then make a photocopy of the power of attorney papers that they brought in. Now, it'll help you a little bit there. You only need to cover the front sheet of the power of attorney, the back sheet where all the signatures are, and then any pages that deal with tax returns. It's normally only 1 page. So a power of attorney might be 8, 10, 15 pages long. You should be able to only copy 3 pages to mail to the IRS. So you take the form 8453, the 2848, the photocopy of the power of attorney, you put it all together in an envelope, get a mailing label, and it gets mailed out to Texas then. And that's the long and the short of doing a power of attorney. So we'll switch gears now and we'll go back over and talk about a deceased taxpayer. We've worked through all these slides. Of course, then you will get the power of attorney or the client in front of you to sign the actual tax return also, so that you can e-file the tax return. So they would sign it just like you would normally get a taxpayer to sign it. Okay, a deceased taxpayer. This only applies to the year of death. After the year of death, it becomes an estate return. So you're only worried about the year that the taxpayer passed away. It's sometimes referred to as the final return. I'll say it over and over. This is not an estate return. If a client comes in saying they need you to prepare an estate return, that is out of scope for VITA. POA does not apply. We emphasized that already. If it's a married couple and one of the couple has passed away, then the other spouse becomes the taxpayer. So maybe we have a situation where we have a husband and wife. The husband was always the taxpayer and the wife was the spouse on the tax return, but the husband has now passed away. So the spouse is coming in for the first time as a widow, and she's asking you to prepare a tax return. I would strongly recommend that you call the tax return forward from last year, if at all possible, and then flip the widow to become the taxpayer and make the deceased husband the spouse on the tax return. It is much easier, particularly if you're doing a PA 1000. If you're doing a property tax or rent rebate and you don't flip the two around, then you're going to try to be doing a property tax rent rebate for a deceased taxpayer, where if you flip them, then you're doing it for the widow who is now the taxpayer, and it's a first time filing, but it's not a deceased taxpayer. So I strongly recommend that if you call it forward from last year, you take the time to flip the two names, making what was last year the spouse now the taxpayer, and who was the taxpayer last year the spouse. So hopefully that's clear, and it's very important. And I know we get into this often at our tax site. If you're in a situation like that, you do the tax return like normal, and the return can be e-filed. There's no additional forms or any action required to deal with that deceased taxpayer. The other situation is it was a single person before on the tax return. They are now deceased. They passed away within the past year or at the beginning of the tax year you're working on. And your first question is to the person who's come in and asked the tax return to be done, has the court appointed you to be the executor? And if so, do you have a copy of the short certificate? They call it a short certificate because it's printed on a half a page of paper. If they are the executor and they do have the short certificate with them, you complete the tax return like you would normally do, entering the date of death, listing the name of the person. We'll get into this in tax layer, but listing the name of the person who is in front of you as the executor. They would sign the tax return, and then the tax return must be paper filed with a copy of the short certificate. You cannot e-file the tax return of a single person deceased tax return. So let's go over to tax layer and see how that works. So we're going to take the same return that we had a power of attorney added to, and now we're going to switch the taxpayer to being deceased. So I'm in the basic information, I'm in the personal information. I come down here and it says taxpayer is deceased, and I'll say yes, and I'll pick a time that they are deceased, and I'll make it in 2018. I'll scroll to the bottom and say continue. Now it asks me who is the person that is preparing the return. So I'll put who I'm told is the executor. And believe it or not, that is it for that situation. Now let's go over to the tax return and see how it printed out. And what I really want to show you is how the names show up. Notice that it says at the top, the taxpayer is deceased on 10/16/2018, and it lists the person who is filing the tax return down at the address line. And that address I would put in as the Mike Smith's address, so that the mail quits going to the taxpayer's mail address and comes to Mike Smith's address, who is the executor. So you do that in the basic information of the tax return. So that's as simple as that is. Now, let's go to another situation. Let's say that Mike Smith is there and the person, Mary Smith, the tax return has passed away, but he has not been appointed the executor yet. And we see there's a refund in the tax return. Now we have to add a different form to file the tax return. So we'll go back to the federal section. We'll go down to the miscellaneous forms section, and we'll pick off claiming a refund due to a deceased taxpayer form. And we're going to fill out that form. So who is the person claiming the refund? It's going to be Mike Smith. What's his Social Security number? What's his address? Okay, now we have a couple questions to answer. Is the surviving spouse requesting the refund? No. Is there a court-appointed or certified personal representative? No, we don't have that yet. And then the answer then is C, a person other than A or B claiming the refund for the decedent's estate. So that's already pre-checked for us, which is good. Check here if you have a valid proof of death. They would have to have a death certificate. And the personal representative, a court has already appointed? No, a court will provide a personal representative for the estate. Hopefully, Mike Smith is telling you, yes, he will eventually be appointed the executor. So we would check B in that case. The personal representative must file for the refund. All right, so let's continue. And a reminder that you cannot file this form electronically. The IRS will reject it, which I was going to tell you anyhow. Okay, let's go over now and see what that form looks like when we look at the tax return. So taxpayer is Mary Smith. The person claiming the refund is Mike Smith. Did the decedent leave a will? We left that as a no. Mike will then have to sign it here. The tax return must be paper filed with this form. And I would imagine the IRS will not give a refund until Mike Smith is appointed the executor. They will hold the refund until that point. This is really the worst situation you can be in with the client, but you can still finish the tax return. You can give him this form. You'll paper file the tax return, and the IRS will start communication then with Mike Smith to work out when they will issue a refund. So ideally, in the years that I've been site coordinator, we've done one of these. And I know that person did not get the refund immediately. They eventually got it, but they didn't get it immediately. Having the short certificate, we've seen several of those, and those seem to go through very quickly. They still need to do the tax return, so if they don't have the short certificate, they're going to have to do a Form 1310, and then they'll start a discussion with the IRS. So that's really the long and the short of how you deal with a deceased taxpayer. Again, not a real big deal. There probably a couple other things I could point out. You do the Pennsylvania return if you're trying to claim tax forgiveness or doing a rent rebate or a real estate tax rebate. You have to annualize the person's income. And that's fairly simple. Let's say they've had 5 months of Social Security and or 5 months of a pension. You would take that amount divided by 5 times 12, and that would be their expected annual income that would be used to calculate tax forgiveness or property tax rent rebate. So that's about all the only thing that you get into with a deceased taxpayer. So thank you for your attention, and that's it.